this evening, this very cold evening apparently, to this weekly presentation on our GLP-1 medications. I am Laura Goldman, the dietitian with Premier Weight Loss, and today's topic is going to be a bit similar to last week's if you were there for that, but maybe a little more in-depth and really hammering home some ways to prepare yourself nutritionally and nutrition-wise for weight loss maintenance before you get there. So before you reach that end goal, let's see some ways that we can prepare ourselves to reach that goal and continue on to have continued success. So I know I say this weekly response every week, and this is especially important and pertinent during this presentation because with weight loss maintenance, it's the quality of your calories that really matters. It's important while you're losing weight, but it's also important to continue that trend afterwards. Briefly, what we'll cover is preparing ourselves, our mindset for weight maintenance while we are losing weight. That's very important. Also, a few points I'll touch on how our nutrition needs can change during that weight loss journey. Some habits that may be helpful to work on right now so that you can have them available to you for long-term success, as well as a few goals or challenges for the week. And as always, I like to leave time for your questions at the end. When we're talking about weight maintenance, it's one of those areas where there is a difference between that and weight loss. One point to think about is that weight loss is very self-reinforcing. You have this goal in mind and you're watching yourself reach that goal. But weight maintenance isn't quite as motivating because you've reached your weight. So what are we working toward? The obvious answer is we're working towards staying there, but finding that motivation seems to be quite a bit harder for most people to stay there because many people view that goal weight as the finish line. I'm sure you've seen or heard people, even yourself, say, once I reach this weight, then, or people will say, I'm going to practice this diet until I reach my goal weight. But there's nothing to be said for what's going to happen afterwards. And that's where people can really fall into some old habits that weren't very helpful. Also, weight regain within 2 to 5 years is quite common. You can see it between 80 to 85% of people who've lost weight. It doesn't necessarily mean that they regain all of the weight back, but some amount of weight regain is quite common. It seems that the struggles primarily lie, although there's a variety of areas. One, your metabolic rate is going to be changing. And I will repeat this a few times during my presentation, and I'll repeat quite a few of these things a few times, but the metabolic rate slows because we are now a lower weight, which means there's lower mass to move. So, of course, we will require fewer calories. And if we are not used to consuming fewer calories consistently, then that can make it a little difficult to stick to, especially when our appetite regulating hormones can maybe work a little different. If we stop using the GLP-1 medications, which you don't have to, you can certainly, and it's oftentimes encouraged to take them during your weight maintenance phase. But if some people stop, the hormones leptin and ghrelin are appetite stimulating hormones frequently. And as people lose weight or cut calories, these hormones can speak very loudly. And GLP-1 medication can make that not sound quite so loud, but it's very easy for that food noise or that demand for more calories to come back with a vengeance if maybe we stop. So that can sometimes be a difficult thing to manage as well. And also a decrease in vigilance. So some people may have weighed out food or tried to measure and pre-portion. Maybe that slows down. Or maybe the adherence to focusing on protein and non-starchy vegetables turns into an option rather than a priority. So those can be a factor, as well as a decrease in vigilance on just general weight. Maybe you will not get on the scale as often, or say, it's a pound here, I'm sure it'll come off. But we have to be careful if we see that slowly gain. Now, some of those challenges that we see when it comes to weight maintenance or weight loss, as I mentioned, aren't as evident while we're using the GLP-1 medications. And they are a tool which can actually help us with the weight loss and maintenance. One, they can certainly help us with our calorie restriction because we're not having as strong of an appetite, and we're also feeling fuller for longer. This is because of the way this tool works. This is the time to make those sustainable habits. And this is the time to focus on healthy eating. And so that becomes more of our norm versus a highly restrictive feeling, or this feeling of I'm on a diet, because then that can make people feel overly restricted. Our general mindset will need to be slightly different as well. Like I mentioned, when we have that mindset of weight loss, we're looking at a little more extreme calorie deficit. We're noticing rapid weight changes, and a lot of times in our mind, the changes that we make, historically, especially with other weight loss programs, for many people, is this whole process is temporary. But the idea of maintenance, that is permanent. And so we have to look at what are our sustainable calories and habits? What are the areas where we can allow some flexibility without falling off the wagon altogether? And like I said, now that we have the tool of the GLP-1 medication to have our appetite lower, this is the chance for us to really focus in on that mindset and finding those sustainable changes that we know we can work with. You may find yourself curious to know if there are any tips or tricks from people who have been there, or people who have been able to keep the weight off after their weight loss success. And in fact, there is a national weight control registry. This is decades old at this time, and there's thousands of people who are members of the registry. And I don't believe there's many, if any, I have not checked, who are using the GLP-1 medications, but they have lost their weight at least 30 pounds and have been able to maintain that loss for at least 1 year. And so there are some common habits based on the studies that have been done looking through this registry. And some of the top habits that you can see are regular physical activity, which is up to an hour of physical activity a day. That doesn't mean hardcore running necessarily, but being active. Also, following a lower calorie, low fat diet. And notice that's not non-fat diet. I do think that having healthy fats in our diet are very important. Eating patterns, I think this is particularly interesting and potentially helpful. They are largely unchanged. So our weekdays and weekends are basically the same. Many people like to have cheat days on the weekends, and every now and then that's understandable. But if it becomes habitual or perhaps it seems to be a bit bigger and bigger and bigger, where that vigilance is lost, then that can become a problem. So try to stay consistent with your eating habits no matter what day of the week it is. Also, they monitor their weight regularly. It doesn't have to be daily weighing, it can be weekly, but some regular vigilance to see where they are. Also, it seems like the majority eat breakfast every morning. I do maintain that if there are some people who have never been interested in breakfast or don't feel well in the mornings and don't want to eat breakfast, that's okay. But it is an opportunity to have some healthy foods and start your day with protein. The good news is weight loss maintenance does appear to get easier over time. So once we can get over those initial humps, those patterns and those habits seem to really settle in and become easier to maintain. Another tip to help with weight and maintenance, this wasn't coming directly from the registry, but something that we've hammered home quite a bit for anybody who's listened to my presentations. You want to continue your focus on protein. Since we've worked to maintain muscle mass during the weight loss process by focusing on protein, that focus doesn't change afterwards. As you lose weight, like I mentioned, your calorie needs will be lower because you won't need as many calories to exist in the world or move around. So you already have a lower calorie need than what you may have been used to. And if you lose more muscle, so if you're not focusing on protein and lose lean body mass, then you're going to have an even lower metabolism. So remember to eat that protein as well as have physical activity to help maintain your muscle. Also, protein can help you feel fuller for longer, and it does require more calories to simply burn. So you're going to burn more calories by eating them. So just remember, if you haven't already made protein a habit, this is the time to start doing that. Also, to keep most of your meals lower calorie, you could consider the concept of volumetrics. This is very loosely based off of the volumetrics diet, but is essentially about eating filling foods that are also low calorie. Most likely you're already doing this if you've been following my recommended plate method, where half of your plate is non-starchy vegetables. But one of the reasons I touch on this is if you are going into a maintenance where you might have a lower dose GLP-1 medication, or if you choose to pause them for whatever reason, the portions that you might be used to right now when your appetite is lower may not feel as satisfying. And we don't want to necessarily increase back to the way our portions used to be, but you can increase the portions of some nutrient dense but calorically light foods. So like I mentioned, focus on having half of your plate being non-starchy vegetables, especially, and also focus on fiber-rich foods because that can help you feel fuller, but also help maintain a healthy microbiome. It's also very important to continue to stay hydrated. Frequently, people can mistake thirst for hunger. So if you focus on staying hydrated first, perhaps you won't have those incorrect hunger cues. I wanted to touch briefly on metabolism in general, since I've mentioned it a few times, and I'm going to be painting this with a very wide brush. There's a lot of nuance involved with this, but hopefully this can give a general picture of what's going on. So as I mentioned, when we lose weight, our bodies require fewer calories because there's less of us to move around, less of us to exist. And so it is really important to adhere to that lower energy need. But what's very interesting is when we lose weight and when we reduce our calorie needs, we also tend to decrease our physical activity, which I think is fairly interesting. So already with a 10% weight loss, you can see that your resting metabolic rate, so your general metabolism, will probably go down about 100 or 200 calories, give or take. This can depend on the person. But our total caloric burn can also decrease by about 200 to 400 calories. And so some of that is we're just not going to burn as much by being active, again, because there's less to move. But it also seems that some people are simply not moving around as much. If you used to be a fidgeter, maybe that's not happening as much. And that burn also then decreases. So there are some people who call this a metabolic adaptation. It's not a huge amount of calories, but it is very important to continue our exercise and weight resistance to help address any type of metabolic adaptation. The graph I have over here is simply showing our caloric intake from where someone may have started. I used an example of a 200-pound male working to get to 180 pounds in about 120 days. So to reach that goal in 120 days, he needed to go from about 2,800 calories a day to just about 1,900 calories a day, which is not easy, of course. But then reaching that goal, you can also see here's that energy expenditure. The orange line is going to decrease a little bit where that burn is happening. Once reaching the goal, you can increase your calories to help with weight maintenance. This area is a bit debated because sometimes our weight or our caloric requirements once we reach our weight goal may not be as high as predicted. So it is important to be vigilant on what your weight is because it can vary again from person to person. But you can see that the calorie needs can increase, so you don't have to be overly restrictive or restrictive for terribly long, but just be aware that it's going to be important to continue some form of exercise and weight resistance to help allow for those calories and not have those lead to weight gain. Again, this is a very brief discussion on a rather complex topic that we're still learning quite a bit about. To touch on that exercise and physical activity, movement and muscle, we want to look at that, and it is important to find an activity you enjoy. If you don't like it, you're not going to stick to it. Ideally, resistance training around 2 times per week, of course, with your healthcare provider's permission. And then other types of physical activity, working in a garden, going on a brisk walk. There are plenty of examples, and trying to aim for 150 minutes of that activity per week or more. There doesn't seem to really be a cap as long as we're being healthy about it, is going to be very beneficial in helping address any potential metabolic adaptations and keep that burn going so that you can not see a weight rebound, essentially. So if you want, there are some different options and ideas that are offered. Find again what works for you. If it's swimming, biking, walking with a dog, anything that keeps you active that you like. So again, to talk about those maintenance behaviors, just remember that the GLP-1 medication is like hitting that easy button or doing the easy mode on a video game because it allows you to build those lifetime habits without having hunger nagging you. And some areas to focus on are consistent meals and patterns throughout the week and weekends, focusing on mindful eating, where we're really paying attention to what we're eating, some occasional self-monitoring, as long as that works for you, whether that be the occasional journaling of foods every now and then, not every day necessarily, and some regular weigh-ins to see where you are. And also being prepared to navigate the challenges of restaurants or holidays, because those are going to be different and you can still enjoy those, but to be prepared ahead of time for what you're going to choose and what's going to be most beneficial. And finally, to deal with stress, many of us use food as a way to cope or offer comfort. So if we can navigate our stress and find non-food ways to deal with that, now is a better time than ever. And you can use those previously on that previous slide, some challenges, or you can look at these challenges for the week. I frequently talk about making protein the priority. So for 3 days this week, try and see if you're making it your priority. Write down what protein you had at each meal. Was it there? And if you're able to estimate properly, did you hit your goal? Remember, about an ounce of a meat is equal to about 7 grams of protein. 1 egg is equal to about 7 grams of protein. So you can use some basic visualization cues there. Or try a new protein item out. There are a multitude of protein options out there. There's protein waters, protein drinks, protein chips, edamame that has been dried and flavored, so it's a little more appealing maybe. try one out and see what you like. Or perhaps you can focus in on mindful eating. Choose one meal where you decide to eat without any distractions. Or sometimes I will comment, eat like a food critic. So really think about the food, the texture, the flavor. What would you rate it? Would you give it 5 stars or 1? And if you give it 1, then let yourself not eat the rest, because if it doesn't taste good, don't waste your calories on it. And you can also use the idea to, before and after you eat, to rate your hunger and your fullness. Are you feeling overly full? Are you feeling way too hungry? Where do you fall? And get used to recognizing when you are satisfied but not uncomfortable. And a third challenge is to get moving. If you know of some physical activities you really enjoy, write them down, schedule them in for part of your day. And if you're new to exercise completely, take 3 walks this week, and it doesn't have to be far. Any amount of activity, again, approved, of course, by your provider. Any amount of activity that you didn't have before but are incorporating now is going to build on that and provide benefits. And I think resistance training is worth considering. A lot of people don't think about that because it does require moving heavy objects, essentially. And so consider adding that in, though, to help with muscle maintenance and muscle growth. And if you know of a reputable personal trainer, that's always a good idea to help practice good form and keep yourself safe. So to tie all of this together, just remember that preparing for maintaining your goal weight, it does start now. It starts before you hit that. And remember that this GLP-1 medication is that tool to help you build those maintenance techniques. And I did a little acronym here, PPMM, your protein, your portions, movement, and mindfulness. Those are some very good foundations to build those sustainable habits. And remember, vigilance is going to be key. We don't get to sit on our laurels for many of our successes in life, and this is no different. So remember to stay vigilant and monitor how we're eating, and also just your weekly weights to help continue that trend. And with that, I am opening this to any questions that you may have. All right. Well, it's been an absolute pleasure. I hope that you have a lovely evening and that you have gotten something out of this presentation tonight. If you have any questions or concerns or would like something expanded upon, please don't hesitate to reach out to myself or the Premier Weight Loss staff. We'll be happy to help and answer any questions that you may have. Thank you so much. Bye.